The autumn wind swept through the canyons of lower Manhattan, carrying with it the scent of roasting chestnuts and exhaust fumes. October 1935. The city that never sleeps was wide awake, watching one man with a mixture of fear and fascination. Thomas Dewey. At 33, Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey had become the most dangerous man in New York, not because he carried a gun, but because he carried something far more lethal, an incorruptible conscience and a stack of indictments with the names of the city's most powerful criminals. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer in the Bronx, sat in the back room of his restaurant on East 149th Street, the Embassy Club, staring at yet another headline. His thick fingers, scarred from decades of street fights, crumpled the newspaper. Dewey targets beer. Baron Schultz empire next on prosecutor's list. "This college boy," Schultz muttered, his gravelly voice barely containing his rage, "thinks he can waltz into my city and dismantle what took me 20 years to build?" Across from him sat Abe Landau, his most trusted enforcer, a man whose loyalty was measured not in words, but in bodies. Landau shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should..." "Should what?" Schultz's pale blue eyes flashed. "Run. Hide. I built this operation from nothing. The beer, the numbers racket, the policy banks, all of it. Every speakeasy from the Bronx to Harlem knows my name." Outside, the elevated train rattled past, its wheels screeching against the tracks. A sound that had become the soundtrack to Schultz's empire. He had survived Prohibition's end by pivoting to the numbers game, the poor man's lottery that operated in every tenement, every street corner, every barbershop in Harlem and the Bronx. But Dewey was different from the prosecutors who came before. He wasn't interested in bribes. He didn't play politics. He had already taken down Waxy Gordon and was systematically dismantling Lucky Luciano's prostitution empire. Schultz stood and walked to the window, watching the street below. Pushcart vendors hawked their goods. Children played stickball in the street. His city. "Get Rosencrantz and Berman," he said quietly. "We need to talk about our options." Landau hesitated. "What kind of options, boss?" Schultz turned, and in his eyes was something Landau had seen before, the look of a man who had decided that violence was the only language left to speak. The permanent kind. The meeting convened 3 days later in a different location, a brownstone in Yorkville, far from Schultz's usual haunts. The neighborhood's German immigrant population provided cover. Here, among the beer gardens and delicatessens, Schultz could move without drawing attention. In the dimly lit parlor, 4 men sat around a table scarred with cigarette burns and whiskey rings. Dutch Schultz, Abe Bo Weinberg, his chief lieutenant, Lulu Rosencrantz, his bodyguard, and Otto Abadaba Berman, his financial genius and numbers calculator. Berman, thin and nervous, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Dutch, the heat from Dewey is already costing us. We're down 40% on the Harlem policy banks. People are scared to play the numbers when they think the cops might raid any day." "I know the numbers, Abadababa," Schultz said, using the nickname with an edge of impatience. "That's why we're here." He spread a map of Manhattan across the table. Red pencil marks indicated Dewey's known locations: his office at 14 Wall Street, his apartment on Fifth Avenue, the route he took to work. "Dewey's not like the politicians," Schultz continued. "He doesn't take money. He doesn't scare. So we stopped trying to buy him or intimidate him." Weinberg, a handsome man with slicked-back hair and a taste for expensive suits, leaned forward. "You're talking about a hit? On a special prosecutor?" "I'm talking about survival," Schultz snapped. "Without Dewey, we're golden. The feds lose interest. The city goes back to normal. With Dewey..." He let the sentence hang. Rosencrantz, a hulking figure with hands like anvils, spoke in his thick accent. "The commission won't like this, Dutch. They got rules about hitting public officials. It brings too much heat." "Then we don't tell the commission," Schultz said flatly. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant sound of a radio playing swing music from a neighboring apartment. Berman removed his glasses and cleaned them nervously. "Dutch, if you do this without approval, if I don't do this, there won't be anything left to approve," Schultz interrupted. "Luciano, Lansky, Costello, they're not the ones with Dewey's crosshairs on them right now. I am, my operation, my people, so I make the decision." But even as he said it, Schultz knew the mathematics of the underworld. The commission, the ruling body created by Lucky Luciano to prevent the kind of gang warfare that had nearly destroyed them all, had one ironclad rule: no hits on law enforcement or prosecutors without unanimous approval. Breaking that rule meant war. "Set up a meeting with the commission," Schultz said finally. "I'll present the case. They're businessmen. They'll see the logic." Weinberg and Rosenkrantz exchanged glances. Neither man looked convinced. Outside, the October night had turned cold, and the first hint of winter rode on the wind. In the streets of New York, people hurried home, unaware that in a brownstone in Yorkville, a decision was being made that would alter the course of organized crime history. Dutch Schultz stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars, and for just a moment he wondered if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The meeting was held at the Franconia Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, in a suite reserved under a false name, October 23, 1935. Outside, the city bustled with evening traffic and theater crowds heading to Broadway. Inside, the most powerful criminals in America gathered to decide the fate of Thomas Dewey, and, unknowingly, of Dutch Schultz himself. The commission's membership read like a who's who of organized crime. Lucky Luciano, the visionary architect of the modern Mafia; Meyer Lansky, the financial genius; Frank Costello, the political fixer; Joe Adonis, the enforcer; and Albert Anastasia, whose reputation for violence made even hardened criminals nervous. Schultz arrived with Rosenkrantz and Landau, but only he entered the suite. The others waited in the hallway, silent sentinels. Inside, cigar smoke hung thick in the air. Luciano sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his scarred face impassive. He gestured to an empty chair. "Dutch, you asked for this meeting. Talk." Schultz sat, his rough-hewn appearance contrasting sharply with the refined gangsters around him. Where they wore silk ties and gold cufflinks, he wore working-class suits and scuffed shoes. Where they spoke softly, he spoke bluntly. "Dewey's going to destroy us," Schultz began without preamble. "Not just me, all of us. He's already got Lucky in his sights for the prostitution racket. He's building cases on half the operations in this city." Lansky, his pale eyes calculating, tapped ash from his cigarette. "So you want permission to kill a special prosecutor? You understand what that means?" "I understand what it means if we don't," Schultz shot back. "How many of you want to spend the next 20 years in Sing Sing? Because that's where Dewey's heading, straight for every one of us." Costello, ever the diplomat, spoke in his cultured voice. "Dutch, we appreciate your concern, but killing Dewey would bring the entire federal government down on our heads. Every politician, every cop, every Fed, they'd have no choice but to come after us. The heat would be unbearable." "The heat's already unbearable." Schultz's voice rose. "He's costing me 40 grand a week. My policy banks are closing. My people are scared to operate. And when he's done with me, who's next? You, Charlie? You, Meyer?" Luciano's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A calculation, a weighing of risks. "We've dealt with prosecutors before. They come and go. We outlast them." "Not this one," Schultz insisted. "I've had people watch him. He doesn't drink. He doesn't gamble. He doesn't chase women. He can't be bought, can't be scared, can't be reasoned with. He's a Boy Scout with subpoena power." Anastasia, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. His voice was soft, but carried an edge of menace. "Maybe Dutch is right. Maybe we clip this problem before it gets worse." But Lansky shook his head firmly. No. Albert, think it through. We kill a prosecutor, and suddenly we're not businessmen anymore. We're cop killers. Every organization we've built, every political connection, every legitimate front, it all goes up in smoke. They'll hunt us like animals. They're already hunting us. Schultz slammed his fist on the table. Luciano raised a hand, and the room fell silent. Dutch, here's the problem. You're thinking like a beer baron from the Bronx. We're thinking like businessmen. Yes, Dewey's a threat, but he's a manageable threat. We have lawyers, we have politicians, we have judges. We work the system. The system doesn't work against Dewey, Schultz said quietly, dangerously. Then we wait him out, Costello said. He's appointed, not elected. His term expires. Politicians change. But if we kill him, we validate everything he's saying about us, that we're thugs who solve problems with bullets. Schultz looked around the table, seeing the decision already made in their faces. They were going to say no. These men, who had built their empires on violence and intimidation, were going to hide behind respectability and patience. I'm asking for a vote, Schultz said. That's how the commission works, right? We vote. Luciano nodded slowly. All right, we vote. Who says yes to sanctioning Thomas Dewey? Silence. Not a single hand rose. Who says no? Every hand went up. Schultz stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You're making a mistake. No, Dutch, Luciano said, his voice harder now. You'd be making the mistake if you move forward with this. Consider this a direct order from the Commission. Thomas Dewey is off limits. You go near him and you're on your own. You understand? Their eyes locked. Two men who had come from nothing, who had built criminal empires in the same city, now on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. I understand, Schultz said finally. But as he walked out of the suite, past his waiting bodyguards, down the elevator and into the October night, everyone in that room knew the truth. Dutch Schultz was a man who didn't take orders well, and that made him the most dangerous kind of problem, the kind that needed to be solved permanently. 3 days after the commission meeting, Dutch Schultz stood in the back office of the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. The restaurant, with its checkered tablecloths and smell of frying onions, had become his unofficial headquarters after fleeing Manhattan's intense scrutiny. But geography couldn't change Schultz's fundamental nature. He was a man who solved problems with violence, and Thomas Dewey remained a problem. They said no, Abadabba Berman said quietly, hunched over ledgers at the desk. That should be the end of it, Dutch. Schultz poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the single bulb overhead. Outside, the industrial landscape of Newark stretched grey and grim under October clouds. The commission, Schultz said with contempt, is run by men who've forgotten what it's like to fight for every dollar. Luciano wears $500 suits now. Meyer Lansky plays the stock market. They've gone soft. Lulu Rosenkrantz, cleaning his revolver at a corner table, spoke without looking up. Soft or not, boss, they're the commission. You go against them. I know what happens, Schultz interrupted, but I also know what happens if I sit on my hands while Dewey builds his case. I end up in Sing Sing or on the electric chair. Some choice. The truth was stark. Dewey's investigation had already seized several of Schultz's policy bank records. Witnesses were being subpoenaed. The net was tightening daily. In the underworld's brutal mathematics, Schultz was measuring time not in months, but in weeks before an indictment came down. Abe Landau entered through the back door, stomping snow off his boots, even though no snow had yet fallen. A nervous habit. I talked to our guy in Dewey's office. The prosecutor's putting together a special grand jury. Could be ready to move by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, less than a month away. Schultz downed his whiskey and poured another. I've made my decision. We're moving forward with the hit. The room froze. Berman stopped writing. Rosenkrantz looked up from his gun. Landau's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Dutch!" Berman finally said, his voice trembling. "They'll kill you. The Commission doesn't make threats. They make corpses. You defy them on this, and Lucky will have no choice." "Then Lucky should have voted differently," Schultz said coldly. He pulled out a map of Manhattan, the same one from the Yorkville meeting, now marked with new notations. Dewey leaves his apartment building every morning at 8:15, walks 3 blocks to the drugstore on Madison for his newspaper. His bodyguards follow at a distance. They're city cops, not wise guys. They're not expecting a professional hit. "Jesus Christ, Dutch," Rosenkrantz breathed. "You've already planned it." "I planned it before I went to the Commission," Schultz admitted. "I was hoping for their blessing, but I don't need it. What I need is for Dewey to disappear." Landau stepped closer, his loyalty warring with his survival instinct. "Boss, please. Think this through. Even if we get Dewey, even if it's clean, the Commission will know it was you. There's no way it's not you, and then at least I'll have removed the threat," Schultz finished. "I'll take my chances with Lucky and the boys. But I won't sit here waiting for Dewey to put me in a cage." The men exchanged glances. They had followed Dutch Schultz through beer wars, through shootouts with rival gangs, through the treacherous years of prohibition. Their loyalty had been earned in blood and money. But this was different. This was suicide. "I need 2 shooters," Schultz continued, as if the decision had been made. "Pros from out of town. Nobody who can be connected back to me. Landau, reach out to the Detroit boys. They owe me from the Purple Gang days." But before Landau could respond, the telephone rang, and shrill interruption that made everyone jump. Berman answered, listened, then held out the receiver, his face pale. "It's for you, Dutch. It's Meyer Lansky." Schultz took the phone, his jaw set. "Meyer." Lansky's voice came through, clear, measured, dangerous. "Dutch, we hear things. We hear you might be thinking of ignoring the Commission's decision. I'm calling as a friend to tell you that would be the last mistake you'd ever make." "Is that a threat, Meyer?" "It's a promise from all of us. You've got enemies, Dutch. Dewey's just one of them. But if you do this thing, if you go through with hitting a prosecutor after we said no, then your enemies won't just be outside the organization. They'll be inside it. They'll be everyone. You understand what I'm saying?" Schultz understood perfectly. The Commission had moved from prohibition to protection. If he killed Dewey, they would kill him. "I hear you, Meyer. I hope you do," Lansky said, and the line went dead. Schultz held the phone for a moment longer, then placed it gently back in its cradle. He looked at his men, these loyal, terrified men who had followed him into every battle. "Get out," he said quietly. "Boss!" Rosenkrantz started. "Get out!" Schultz roared. "All of you! I need to think!" They fled, leaving him alone in the small office with his maps and his whiskey and his rage. Outside, the November darkness had fallen early, and the streetlights of Newark cast long shadows across the empty restaurant. Dutch Schultz poured another drink and stared at the map of Manhattan, at the red X marking Thomas Dewey's apartment building. He had already made his choice. He just didn't know yet that the Commission had made theirs, too. The Claridge Hotel in Manhattan, October 28th, 1935. In the suite overlooking Times Square, where the electric billboards painted the night in gaudy colors, the Commission reconvened for an emergency session. This time, Dutch Schultz was not invited. Lucky Luciano sat at the head of the table, his expression grim. Around him, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, and several other senior members of the organization. The mood was funereal. "He's not backing down," Lansky said without preamble. "My sources say he's already reaching out to out-of-town talent for the Dewey hit. He's moving forward." Costello lit a cigarette, his hand steady despite the weight of the discussion. Then we have a problem that requires a permanent solution." The words hung in the air. Everyone understood what permanent solution meant in their world. Anastasia, surprisingly, hesitated. "Dutch is one of us. We've worked with him for years. He's hot-headed, but he's always been a solid earner." "Was a solid earner," Lansky corrected. "Now he's a liability, and he's about to become a catastrophic one." Luciano had remained silent, his scarred face thoughtful. Now he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Let's be clear about what's at stake. If Dutch kills Dewey, every organization we've built is finished. The feds will come down on us like nothing we've ever seen. Politicians who take our money will distance themselves. Cops we own will suddenly get amnesia. Judges will stop hearing our appeals. More than that," Costello added, "we'll lose legitimacy. We've spent years positioning ourselves as businessmen who happen to operate outside the law. We kill a prosecutor, and we're back to being the thugs from the old days. The Mustache Pete's who started wars over insults." The Mustache Pete's reference wasn't casual. It invoked the old guard of the Mafia, men like Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, whose adherence to old-world traditions and willingness to engage in bloody warfare had nearly destroyed organized crime in America. Luciano had orchestrated their removal in 1931 precisely to create a more modern, business-oriented criminal enterprise. Dutch Schultz, in his stubborn defiance, represented a return to those chaotic days. "What about the money he brings in?" Anastasia pressed. "The policy banks, the numbers racket, that's millions a year." "We're millions," Lansky said. "Dewey's already decimated his operation, and even if Dutch survives, his days as a major earner are over. Dewey's not going to stop. The question is whether we let Dutch take us all down with him." Luciano stood and walked to the window, looking down at the seething masses of Times Square, the theater-goers, the tourists, the hustlers, and working stiffs who made up the great churning machine of New York. This was his city now, not through violence, but through influence and intelligence. He wouldn't let Dutch Schultz destroy that. "There's another factor," Luciano said, turning back to the room. "If we let Dutch defy the commission and get away with it, what message does that send? Every ambitious capo in every city will think they can ignore our decisions. The commission only works if everyone respects its authority." Costello nodded slowly. "So we're not just stopping a reckless hit. We're preserving the organization itself." "Exactly," Luciano said. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Dutch Schultz had to go. The only question was how. "It needs to look like a robbery," Lansky said, his mind already working through the logistics. "Or a dispute with his own men, something that doesn't point back to us." "And it needs to be soon," Costello added, "before he moves on Dewey." Anastasia, who had been given the responsibility of execution, literally, pulled out a small notebook. "The Palace Chop House, Newark. He's there almost every night, going over the books with Berman. Minimal security. We can do it clean." "No witnesses," Luciano said firmly, "and nobody talks ever. This goes to the grave with everyone involved." The men around the table nodded. They were sentencing one of their own to death, and they all understood the gravity of that decision. But they also understood the alternative. As the meeting broke up and the commission members slipped out of the hotel separately, disappearing into the New York night, none of them felt satisfaction or triumph. They felt like surgeons who had just decided to amputate a limb to save the body. The operation was necessary. That didn't make it any less brutal. Back in Newark, unaware that his death warrant had just been signed, Dutch Schultz sat in the Palace Chop House, drinking beer and reviewing ledgers with Abadaba Berman. "The numbers are good this week," Berman said, pointing to figures. "If we can hold steady through Thanksgiving—" "We won't have to hold through Thanksgiving," Schultz interrupted. "Dewey will be dead by then." Berman said nothing, but his hand shook slightly as he turned the page. Outside, the night was cold and clear, And somewhere in Manhattan, men were already making plans, not to kill Thomas Dewey, but to kill the man who wanted him dead. The mathematics of the underworld were absolute. Dutch Schultz had become a problem, and the Commission solved problems the only way they knew how, with bullets. The evening of October 23, 1935, began like any other at the Palace Chop House on East Park Street in Newark. The restaurant's neon sign flickered in the early darkness, casting red and blue shadows across the wet pavement. Inside, the dinner crowd, mostly locals, a few wise guys, ate their steaks and minded their business. In the back room, Dutch Schultz sat at his usual table with three of his most trusted men, Abadaba Berman, Abe Landau, and Lulu Rosenkrantz. The table was scattered with papers, betting slips, ledgers, and a half-finished bottle of beer that had gone warm. "Chicago's asking if we can extend the wire service to Gary, Indiana," Berman said, his finger tracing down a column of numbers. "They're willing to pay 5 points off the top." Schultz barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere, on Thomas Dewey, on the Commission's rejection, on the hit he was planning to order despite their prohibition. He had made his decision. Tomorrow, he would reach out to Detroit for the shooters. Tomorrow. "Boss?" Berman prompted. "The Chicago thing?" "Yeah, fine, whatever," Schultz muttered. "I need to use the can." He stood and walked toward the restroom, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor. Behind him, his men continued their discussion, unaware that several blocks away, 3 men were parking a stolen black sedan. The restroom was small, clean, with black and white hexagonal tiles and a single bare bulb overhead. Schultz stood at the urinal, lost in thought, when he heard the front door of the restaurant open. New customers, nothing unusual. But then came the sound that every gangster recognizes instinctively, the metallic click-clack of pistol slides being racked. And then the world exploded into gunfire. Charles, the Bug workman, entered the Palace Chop House with Emmanuel Mendy Weiss, both carrying 38 revolvers. A third man, their driver, waited outside with the engine running. Workman's instructions from Albert Anastasia had been precise, quick, professional, no witnesses among Schultz's crew. The restaurant patrons could live. They'd scatter and their stories would be confused, but Dutch and his men had to go down. They found the back room occupied by 3 men bent over papers. The nearest, Abadaba Berman, thin and bespectacled, looked up, his eyes widening in recognition and terror. "Oh, God!" Workman fired twice. Berman jerked backward, blood blooming across his white shirt. Landau lunged for his shoulder holster, but Weiss was faster, putting 3 rounds into his chest. Rosenkrantz, the big man, managed to draw his weapon and fire once, wild, the bullet burying itself in the doorframe, before both hitmen concentrated their fire on him. The roar of gunfire in the enclosed space was deafening, apocalyptic. Spent shell casings tinkled on the tile floor like copper rain, and through it all, in the restroom, Dutch Schultz heard death arrive for his men. He was trapped. The restroom had only one exit, and it led directly into the line of fire. But staying put meant dying like a rat in a hole. Years of street fighting overrode his fear. He burst through the door, reaching for the gun in his waistband. Workman spun, saw the figure emerging from the restroom, and fired on instinct. The first shot caught Schultz in the stomach, a white-hot lance of agony that folded him forward. The second grazed his shoulder. Schultz fired back, his shot going wide. Then he stumbled backward into the restroom and collapsed against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, leaving a crimson streak on the white tiles. "Is that Dutch?" Weiss called out, his ears ringing from the gunfire. Workman moved quickly to the restroom, his gun raised. He saw Schultz slumped there, gut-shot, his weapon fallen beside him. The Dutchman's face was grey, his breathing shallow and laboured. For a moment, their eyes met. Schultz, Arthur Flegenheimer from the Bronx, the beer baron, the numbers king, looked at his executioner with something between rage and resignation. "Finish it," Schultz gasped. But workmen heard sirens in the distance. Newark police responding to reports of gunfire. No time for cleanup. He turned and ran, Weiss already heading for the door. They were in the car and gone in seconds, disappearing into Newark's industrial maze, leaving behind a scene of carnage. The first police officers on scene found a slaughterhouse, Abe Landau, dead in a spreading pool of blood. Lulu Rosenkrantz, somehow still alive, making gurgling sounds as his lungs filled with blood. Abadaba Berman, conscious but fading, clutching his ruined stomach. And in the restroom, Dutch Schultz, the man who had defied the commission, sat against the wall with his intestines perforated by a .38 slug. But he wasn't dead, not yet. "Ambulance!" one cop shouted, his face pale. "Get 3 ambulances! Now!" Schultz looked up at the officer, his legendary toughness keeping him conscious despite catastrophic injuries. "Water," he whispered. "I need water." As the ambulance bells rang through Newark streets and police photographers arrived to document the scene, Dutch Schultz remained conscious, his mind wandering through memories and delirium, knowing with absolute certainty what had happened. The commission had spoken. Not with a vote, but with bullets. And the price of defiance, he now understood with perfect clarity, was death. Newark City Hospital, October 24th, 1935. Dutch Schultz lay in a bed in the emergency ward, his abdomen swathed in bandages already seeping red. The doctors had operated for 3 hours, but the damage was catastrophic. Peritonitis had set in almost immediately. The Dutchman was dying, and everyone knew it. Police Sergeant Luke Conlon sat by the bedside with a stenographer, hoping to get a dying declaration that could be used in court. What he got instead was one of the most bizarre documents in criminal history. Schultz, delirious from morphine and sepsis, rambled incoherently. His words tumbled out in a fever dream of memories, regrets, and paranoid fantasies. "A boy has never wept, nor dashed 1,000 Kim," he muttered, his eyes unfocused. "Please crack down on the Chinaman's friends and Hitler's commander." Conlon leaned forward. "Dutch, who shot you? Give me names." "The Baron says these things, yes," Schultz continued, seemingly in response. "I don't know why. Mother is the best bet, and don't let Satan draw you too fast." The stenographer's fingers flew, capturing every word, though none of it made sense. For hours, Schultz rambled about his mother, about money hidden in various locations, about betrayals real and imagined. "Please, oh please, do you know where the money is?" he said at one point, gripping Conlon's arm with surprising strength. "I want to get it. It's in a shoebox. At the—" But then the thought dissolved into more gibberish. What Schultz didn't say, what he couldn't or wouldn't say, were the names of his killers. Whether from the underworld code of silence or simple inability to form coherent thoughts, he took that knowledge to his grave. At 8:35 p.m. on October 24th, 1935, exactly 22 hours after being shot, Arthur Flegenheimer, known to the world as Dutch Schultz, died. He was 33 years old. His death made front-page news across the country. The headlines told the story the commission wanted told. Gang warfare claims Schultz. Numbers King dies in beer war shooting. Rival mobsters suspected in Newark massacre. No mention of the commission's involvement. No connection to the Thomas Dewey assassination plot. Just another gangster killed by gangsters. The natural order of the underworld reasserting itself. Of the other victims, Abe Landau was already dead at the scene. Lulu Rosenkrantz survived through the night but died the next day. Only Abadaba Berman held on, and before he died, he told a visiting detective, "It was nobody's fault. We were having a business meeting." Even in death, the code held. Charles Workman, the triggerman, was eventually arrested 3 years later on an unrelated charge. He was convicted of Schultz's murder and served 23 years in prison, but he never revealed who had ordered the hit. The commission's involvement remained unproven, unspoken, a ghost story told in whispers. Thomas Dewey, The man whose impending assassination had sealed Schultz's fate never knew how close he had come to death. He continued his prosecutorial crusade unabated, eventually convicting Lucky Luciano on prostitution charges in 1936 and sending him to prison for 30 to 50 years. Dewey's career flourished. He became district attorney of New York County, then governor of New York, and twice ran for president of the United States. He lived to be 71, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1971, a fate very different from the one Dutch Schultz had planned for him. The commission emerged stronger from the Schultz affair. The message had been sent and received. No one was above the organization's rules, no matter how powerful or profitable. The willingness to eliminate one of their own to prevent a catastrophic mistake demonstrated a level of discipline and long-term thinking that separated the modern mafia from the chaotic gang wars of the past. Meyer Lansky, when asked years later about Schultz's death, said simply, "Dutch was a good earner, but he couldn't think beyond tomorrow. In our business, you need to think about next year, next decade. He was stuck in the old ways." Lucky Luciano, in exile in Italy in the 1950s, was more philosophical. Dutch thought he could solve every problem with a gun. Sometimes you can, but not that time. That time, the gun just got him killed. The Palace Chop House closed permanently after the shooting. For years, locals reported that late at night, you could still smell gunpowder in the building. It was eventually demolished, replaced by a parking lot, then an office building. But in the underworld, the lessons of October 23, 1935 lived on. The Commission's authority had been tested and proven absolute. The price of defiance had been paid in blood. And somewhere in the foundations of New York's criminal empire, built on pragmatism and brutal enforcement of internal rules, Dutch Schultz's death became a parable, a story told to ambitious young gangsters about what happens when you put your own survival above the organization's stability. Thomas Dewey lived because Dutch Schultz died. The Mafia's no had sealed the Dutchman's fate, just as surely as his own defiance had. In the cold mathematics of organized crime, it was a simple equation. One man's death prevented a war that would have destroyed them all. Dutch Schultz, the last of the old-school gang bosses, was sacrificed to preserve the new order. And the Commission, having proven its willingness to kill its own, ruled the American underworld for the next half-century, until a different generation of prosecutors, following Thomas Dewey's blueprint, finally brought them down through RICO statutes and turned witnesses. But that's another story. This one ends in a Newark hospital room, with a dying gangster's fevered last words being carefully transcribed, and with the knowledge that in the shadow world of organized crime, there are rules even killers must follow, or die trying to break them.